Go ahead. Put it on there.
Won't it fall off?
Definitely.
Isn't that dangerous?
Not to me.
If you're wondering why it seems as though the cars built back in the 1990s and 2000s were built a little bit better, that's because they were, but that's to a certain degree. What's up, guys? Welcome to The Breakdown, where we talk about everything cars, news, and reviews. If you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're not, welcome back. So it's pretty common nowadays to hear about a manufacturer either recalling a particular vehicle or a line of vehicles or halting production due to quality control concerns. But in the last year, more than 400 recalls were released affecting 25 million vehicles, and that was in the United States for 2022 alone. Now, while all recalls and campaigns are not the same, cars are becoming more and more technologically engineered and regulations are becoming stricter, as well as supply chains are becoming more and more constrained. So I thought it'd be a really good exploration to do a deep dive into whether or not car quality has gotten better or has it gotten worse, or is it simply Friday's news. With that being said, stick around and stay tuned because you are now watching The Breakdown. All right, y'all, cue the lights. As always, if you enjoy this kind of content, feel free to like and subscribe to the channel. It means a lot to me, more so than the algorithm. So let's do a deep dive. So there is this illusion before we get started of people's perception and the perfect car. And I want to go ahead and tell you guys now, there is no such thing as the perfect car. As of this recording, there are 105 million vehicles on the road today, according to the Federal Highway Administration. Now, as I said, in other vehicles, there's no perfect car, and there's also no perfect brand. For many people, they'll oftentimes recommend things such as Toyota as Honda, but that just means that they're not really perfect. It just means that they're less likely to be problematic, unlike X. But the idea that any vehicle is perfect is absolutely absurd. Now, there are certain companies such as JD Power and Associates, Edmunds, and Wards who obviously give various accolades, and the accolades tend to shift each and every year. And to give a good example, for about the last 20 years, Kia would have never been in the same conversation as Lexus. But as of 2022, according to JD Power Dependability Associates, I cannot say these fucking words today. According to JD Power and Associates Dependability Study, Kia ranked number 3 in addition to Lexus and Genesis, which is crazy considering that Genesis is also owned by Hyundai. But I do want to explore an idea that I want to share with you all, which is that typically is not what we think it is. Let me explain. So there's this little thing called initial quality and there's long-term quality. Now, according to JD Power, their dependability study is typically over 3 years, but for many people, the initial quality is just the tip of the iceberg. And before I go any further, I also want to point out that planned obsolescence is very much a thing, so there is no real expectation when it comes to how long a car is going to last because it was often engineered to basically not last as long. Despite cars lasting much longer and ownership lasting much more higher, which I'll talk about much later in the actual video because we do go over ownership. But let me give you a few points of reference to explore what it looks like for the timestamps of how long you can expect to own a car before its quality begins to tank. One of the first things that many consumers experience is the early stage, which is the first 2 or 3 years of ownership. And during this period, this is the fresh newness of the car. It's just drove off the factory to the dealership into your hands. And any type of warranty issues that may occur during this period are covered under the manufacturer's warranty. And in the event there's too many, then it goes into litigation for the lemon law, which I am not an attorney, but I can tell you that the lemon law does affect many car owners and makes for a horrible car ownership experience. The next milestone that you go through after the initial is the warranty period. Now, there is an extension of warranty period which goes under certified pre-owned vehicles, but many cases the warranty period is covered by either a mileage cap or a year cap, and it is typically whichever comes first. As you begin to age into the car and you begin to drive the car more often, you are now into the aging and wear and tear of that car, which is usually beyond the 5-year period, and this is when most general maintenance wear and tear items begin to collapse. But quality, reliability, and durability oftentimes are not seen until this period. It's very easy to say that during the initial period that most of the quality specs are up to par. Howsoever, many people are beginning to buy more and more used cars than new cars, so those used cars are a little older, and that's really where you begin to see the true durability of each and every car. Considering these factors, it's very easy for each and every customer to misunderstand how brands can be misrepresented in terms of what's a good car when they're going through the shopping process. But that does not change the idea, however, that car quality has in fact seen a decline. One of the things that we're most familiar with, if anybody who's worked a corporate job or who's worked a service job, you know that cost cutting is the way and the name of the game. As you all know, that cost cutting in manufacturing refers to the practice of reducing expenses and production to maximize profits, often resulting in compromises in quality and durability. This approach typically comes from the idea that the shareholders usually have the most say-so power in what a company does, and honestly, it's just the nature of capitalism in itself. As we all know, when you start cutting costs, that usually compromises the quality of everything we see. But I do want to point this out, that cars, in fact, are cheaper than they used to be back in the day. Now, in terms of inflation, for example, a 1997 Toyota Camry MSRP started at $16,818 for a base model. Inclusive of inflation, this would cost you $32,067.62. A base model today would cost you $27,197. Considerably, automobiles focus more on safety and mechanics, which is partly why they're cheaper, because they use less and less mechanical materials to oftentimes lighten the vehicle for the sake of fuel efficiency as well as safety. This is why you begin to see more and more cars feel lighter, even though they are still not quite that much different than they used to be, or why older cars feel heavier, because they're using lighter plastics and materials such as aluminum. According to Medium, cars have transformed into advanced computer systems, incorporating a complex network of electronic units. In fact, modern vehicles are equipped with over 70 to 100 different computers, containing an astounding 100 million lines of code, surpassing 14 million lines of code that could be found in something like a Boeing 787 Dreamliner. With that focus on materials, they pretty much become less and less durable for the sake of cost, and the injection of technology is used to appeal and market to consumers. Now, keep in mind that quality and durability are very different terms and should not be used in the same capacity if you're talking about a particular thing, but that's a different story, so I digress. And that ties into my next point, which is electronic nightmares. Now, as we begin to include more and more technology, you begin to also see more and more tech engaged and integrated into the vehicle. Now, I want to go ahead and let you guys know that tech inside of cars is very, very old, but the difference is that back when those cars had more tech, basically when the radio was bumping back in the 30s, that is not the same as the adaptive driver assistance programs and systems that you see today and the autonomous driving that we see today, because the computers are multiples and much, much greater than the radios that used to be of the 1930s. Now, granted, that was some hot technology back in the day. I must say, we had to cut a rug when we was in the car, because baby, back in the rows in the 30s, you was doing something. But I digress. As I said, back in the 30s, radios were the closest thing to technology that you could get in a car, with the first of them being the Motorola AM radio, which I don't even know, people still do listen to radio AM, but I mean, nowadays we just stream on our phones. Fast forward into the 1990s, and the first Bluetooth tech was introduced, and one of the first car makers to take a chance was actually Chrysler, because Chrysler was pretty much willing to do anything to make innovation. They introduced the first Bluetooth capable system in 1999, and Honda was one of the first companies to make this standard in 2003. Now, manufacturers such as BMW, Mercedes, and Lexus had such things such as the car phone. However, this was not the same as the Bluetooth technology, but this is back when things were simpler. Nowadays, you have several different systems to operate a radio, and then to also operate different things such as the fuel gauge, the temperature, the tire pressure. Everything is monitored by a computer, and that creates more and more headaches. One of the things that a lot of people don't even know is that your accelerator is driven by a drive-by-wire system, which is actually driven by the computer. It is not connected to the car. With more than 70 computers all functioning to operate everything from the accelerator to the gesture controls to turn the radio, and we all know what happens when you touch the radio knob.
You need to leave.
Looking at you, Honda. We're looking at you. Which, to think that you are removing the radio knob just for the sake of cost is a bit ridiculous, but I digress. As more and more manufacturers continue to consolidate functionality for the sake of cost, it becomes more and more evident that the goal is not to focus on usability for the consumer, but to focus on the expense reduction for the shareholders. And of course, when you have more and more technology, it creates more and more potential for technology to go wrong. Assuming they're not charging for the service like that time that BMW charged us for CarPlay, which we all know how that went. there becomes more and more disturbing compromises that companies are willing to take for the sake of cost cutting, and this leads to the overall perspective that cars essentially sucked in build quality. And as we begin to see this, we begin to see more and more disturbing compromises on safety features, essentially putting consumers at risk to maximize profits. Now, in terms of safety, recalls are just the nature of the beast. Over the past 60 years, we have seen it all. From GM to BMW, every manufacturer has had some form of a recall. From exploding fuel tanks to defective accelerators to exploding airbags that could potentially cut you by the throat. We've seen it all. But those are more so mechanical recalls and not necessarily as a result as build quality as much as it is poor engineering and supplier defects. Now, one could argue that manufacturers should be more due diligent in understanding and finding out whether or not these recalls are effective to the consumer. But as we as society begin to create more and more demand and the need for newest and innovative technology and the push towards electrification, which is a huge perpetuator of this volatile cycle, we begin to see a complete cut in the overall quality because these manufacturers have to work 10 times harder to be able to produce these vehicles. And the reality is, as you begin to see more and more cars being produced, and the harder they're produced to meet customer demand, the more and more quality issues you will see. Now, truth be told, the quality issues have not become much more different than they were back in the 1990s, as much as we would like to think. Howsoever, because of the volume of cars that are being produced at a significant rate due to efficiency standards and better lean Six Sigma practices within supply chain and manufacturing, the numbers look a little bit different. In terms of customer satisfaction, cars fell by 1.3% from 2021 to 2022, according to a study conducted by the American Customer Satisfaction Index, and many luxury car makers gained points while some mainstream cars fell, as I was saying about Kia getting up and Toyota falling down. But drivers are becoming less and less satisfied with the overall ownership experience, partly because cars are not only more expensive, but more importantly, the warranty standards have not changed, because the standard practice is 3 years, 36,000 miles, but many manufacturers that are not luxury manufacturers believe that they should not have to cover these warranties because these cars are built to last. If you don't know anything about cars, most modern cars will last you around 250,000 miles before you have any significant issues, but that's assuming that the car is of young age and you properly take care of the car. And to be honest, many people are starting to hold their cars longer, which most people hold their cars now up to 12.5 years, which is much higher than it used to be back in 1995 at around 8 years before people got rid of them. And despite all of the issues with cars nowadays, more and more people are beginning to hold on to their cars longer, particularly because of the hefty price tag that comes along with the used cars, as they've increased about 42% from 2019. But nonetheless, as cars are becoming more and more complex, it appears as though that the build quality has in fact declined. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but the best thing to understand is that these cars are not designed to last forever. And that is the perspective to have when owning a car. You should have it enough pretty much to get you from whatever you need to get out of it and hope that it lasts as long as it needs to. But you should always be preparing for the next car. Overall, the build quality of cars has in fact declined, but is not by as much as we would like to think. Now, what can you do to prevent getting a car that's of poor quality? The best thing that you can always do is to look at the overall model reputation, not necessarily the brand reputation, and basically be mindful that when you buy the car, whether it be 1 year old, whether it be brand new, whether it be 10 years old, to understand that cars are going to have problems and you should be preparing for your repairs in the event something happens, or make sure you get a warranty to prevent that. But with that being said, that is the end of the video. Let me know what you think about your conclusions about if car quality has gone down or whether or not it's just a figment of our imagination. And with that being said, until the next video, I will see you guys later.